Hi. Hello. I am recording this video from my parents' bathroom because, long story short, just for today, I'm basically stuck in my parents' house. So I don't have access to a computer or a way to make a video, and I'm busy. So I don't want to go drive to the place that has a computer. So I have been wanting to make this video for a very long time, and I wanted it to be high effort. I wanted it to be very edited, and there'd be a lot of stuff to it. But I am quickly realizing that I simply do not have time. I do not have time. Not even close. So I'm just gonna make a low effort, me talking to the camera type video about this. So, Gooseworks, TADC, 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 The Amazing Digital Circus, Gooseworks. That's obviously how I pronounce their name. Or is it her name? I actually don't remember. I am going to lay a theory on you so heavy, so ridiculous. They're gonna be like, what the fuck is he talking about? So, I don't even know if this qualifies as a theory because I'm not guessing what's gonna happen in the show. I mean, I guess I am guessing a couple of plot points, but I believe that the game, The Stanley Parable, and the game The Beginner's Guide were massive inspirations for the show and are going to inform its ending. So I want to just put this prediction out there so that when I have time to sit down and make video essays, I can say, hey, see, I knew this beforehand. So I want to make a disclaimer here. So first of all, the movie has apparently leaked online. I have not seen the leaks. I have seen the first 60 seconds of the leak just to verify that it was real. And I couldn't even really verify that it was real from those 60 seconds because it was kind of a slow opening where I didn't even see any characters yet. So I don't know if the leak was fake or if it's real. Now I'm hearing some speculation online about the leak not being real. And I believe the speculation, actually, which might surprise you, but there's a lot of reasons why. And it's kind of too much to go into right now, but the really long and short of it is that there is a lot of evidence that the story that we got in the leak just doesn't make sense for where the story's going, and I haven't heard most of the story of the leak, but I've heard a little bit of it because I've gotten some of it spoiled for me. And the story that has been spoiled for me doesn't make any sense. So I refuse to watch the leak on principle. I watched like 60 seconds of it just to confirm like this is real, this isn't like a troll, this is actually a real thing. And again, it was like, I mean, I hope you wouldn't consider this a spoiler. It was like an environmental shot of the circus. And I was like, okay, it's real. It's real, or it's real enough that I don't want to see any more of it. I'm just not going to watch it. And I learned after I saw that people think the leak is fake. I've seen little screenshots of one-to-one recreations of the trailer moments where Zubal's head parts are different than they are in the trailer, which heavily implies that the leak is fake, or it's AI generated or something. One of the shots straight up just has Zubal with multiple head parts sticking out at the same time, which would make sense if it was AI generated and it was pulling from the different episodes and they had like different head parts slapped on or something. But what I do know is that there's a lot of argument online about it. A lot of people are like, this is holy cope, this is just the movie fucking leaked and that's what it is. And some people are like, maybe there's multiple endings. Maybe there's multiple endings to the show depending on something, maybe something ARG related. And one of the endings is different than what we're going to get in the movie, and that's the one that leaked. Or the one that is going to play in the movie theaters did really leak, and that one isn't the true ending. And now, so this you might be like, where the fuck is this coming from? So The Stanley Parable is a game from 2013 where there's a bunch of endings and it's real meta. And it was made in a time period where that kind of thing hadn't been done much before. Undertale hadn't been made yet, so fourth wall breaking games wasn't nearly as common. It was kind of a novelty. And Stanley Parable released to critical success, and it's very popular and it's very well known, and it probably inspired the Backrooms, as in the 4chan text post, the Backrooms. And because I know there's like 4 different versions of the Backrooms, depending on who you ask. There's the 4chan one that Kane Pixels took some creative liberties with. There's more traditional creepypasta horror renditions of the 4chan version. There's the Tumblr versions, like the Backrooms wiki, and there's other ones based on other genres of liminal space images. There's a whole fucking genre of Backrooms genres. There's a whole set of them. So I want to be clear about this. The Stanley Parable probably inspired the Backrooms for reasons that I will be spoiling if I told you what happens in the Stanley Parable, but what you should know is that the Stanley Parable has multiple endings, and it's relevant to TADC because in episode 1, in the pilot episode, she goes into the office backrooms, and it's very reminiscent of the Stanley Parable in the Backrooms. And someone asked Gooseworks, was this part inspired by the Stanley Parable? And Gooseworks responded by saying, a lot of what I do is inspired by the Stanley Parable, which heavily implies that the Stanley Parable is relevant to the show's plot somehow, or at the very least that the Stanley Parable inspires the way that she does things for whatever that means. And I think that what's happening is that I honestly agree with Danny North, the YouTuber Danny North, that it's likely that the show's going to have multiple endings. So that being said, what am I getting at? What am I putting on the table that's new that Danny North hasn't said yet? I'll tell you what it is. The Beginner's Guide is the spiritual sequel to the Stanley Parable. Now I say spiritual sequel because there is now an actual sequel, Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe. Spoiler alert, that isn't a spoiler alert. The Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe is basically the Stanley Parable 2. It's a sequel. But it's marketed as a remaster. And that bait and switch of you thinking it's a remaster and then actually it's a sequel with more content is part of the experience. It's intended that you go into the game thinking it's simply a remaster of the first game, and then it turns out to have like twice as much content as the first game. That's like part of the joke. I don't really care about spoiling that anymore. I think it's important to tell people that because it will inform the purchasing decision on whichever game people buy. Ultra Deluxe basically is a remaster of the entire first game with a little bit of content slightly different, but mostly, and a couple of the endings completely changed admittedly, but then the final, but then there's like also twice as much new content on top of what was already there. So it's just like Stanley Parable, but more. It's like DDLC Plus, kind of, except it's way more expansive than Plus was. So I am, it's kind of similar. But the point is, I want to talk about this, so I am going to be spoiling the entirety of the Stanley Parable and the Beginner's Guide in this video to give you my theory. So genuinely, the Stanley Parable, I experienced for the first time as a mod of Half-Life 2 in 2011 when I was 12 years old on YouTube when PewDiePie played it. And then a little later when Markiplier played it. I don't know who played it first, to be honest. But that's the order I watched them in. And in 2013, they made the Stanley Parable HD Remix, which eventually just became rebranded to the Stanley Parable because they didn't want their branding to be associated with a Half-Life 2 mod because that gets into copyright nonsense. They didn't want to chance it, so they just called it the Stanley Parable Definitive Edition, and then they just shortened it to the Stanley Parable. And so it is actually a remake. It's a remake of the 2011 version with more content, and it's made in 2013. So Ultra Deluxe is kind of just another version of that, just the same game again, but with more content. And so that's like a sequel to the Stanley Parable. But the Beginner's Guide was a game that the guy who wrote the Stanley Parable, because there was a guy who wrote the Stanley Parable and the guy who like made most of the maps for the Stanley Parable. But Davey helped with the maps too. The guy who helped with the maps was William Pugh. He always got frustrated that people never credited him, and Davey never credited him enough. But Davey Reedon is the guy who wrote the games. and he wrote a game called The Beginner's Guide. And this game, I sincerely believe, is extremely important in foreshadowing the end of the show, The Amazing Digital Circus. So, again, these are life-changing games. I experienced it in 2011, I experienced it again in 2013. It never left my brain, and to the point where in 2019, it was still in my subconscious, and I made a Minecraft map that was, I didn't even consciously realize was inspired by the Stanley Parable. Some parts of it were inspired by certain endings from the Stanley Parable. And I did so much stuff that was inspired by the Stanley Parable in my life. It's always kind of been in the back of my mind. And then in 2019, I revisited it, and I also revisited the new game made by the Stanley Parable guy, The Beginner's Guide. And I actually found The Beginner's Guide by pure chance on YouTube, recommended in a completely different context. So I'm trying to convince you that it's worth it to not spoil yourself and play these games yourself. It is so worth it, unironically, for you to play the Stanley. If you don't have the patience to play all of them, then just the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe and then the Beginner's Guide. But I would recommend you play the original Stanley Parable and then Beginner's Guide and then Ultra Deluxe. I would recommend you do that in that order, but what the fuck do I know? I'm stupid and wrong. I'd also recommend you play the original 2011 mod for Half-Life 2, but you don't have to do that. And Davey Reedon has actually said that he would prefer people not do that, so I don't know. So that's the Stanley Parable and the Beginner's Guide. And recently he made a newer game called Wander Stop. I haven't played that game yet. I don't know what happens in it. People have told me it's good. It's nothing like the Stanley Parable. It's its own genre. I haven't played it. I don't know what it is. I know nothing about it other than that Davey Reedon made it and C418, C418 made the music for it. So I am already sold on it. So I've just been yapping for almost 12 minutes. What is your theory, Verb? Okay, look, again, one final warning. Spoiler warning for the Stanley Parable, the Beginner's Guide, and the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe. They are life-changing pieces of media. They genuinely made me extremely emotional. You have been warned. I will also warn you, though, that they are kind of depressing if media makes you depressed easily. So maybe go into it with that knowledge. And a bit of a trigger warning that there's themes of suicide. Okay. Gamers. The Stanley Parable is a game where Stanley walks through a office building, and now, spoilers ahead. Basically, he, click away now, now's your last chance. Okay. Stanley and the narrator, there's a narrator talking about Stanley. Stanley does what he's told, and then one day he awakens and gets free will, and then the narrator talks in past tense about the things you're doing. And then he talks up in past tense about the things you haven't done yet. And you have the choice to obey the narration or go do your own thing. And when you go do your own thing, the narrator gets a little sassy and starts talking back to you. And if you just do nothing but disobey him, he gets really frustrated with you. And it's kind of this whole funny haha situation. And it's honestly not that expansive of a game. People always overstate it. But there's like 21 main endings, and they're all done pretty damn well. And the thing is, there's a lot of endings, and the main theme of the game is that when you listen to the narrator, you get the true ending. And almost nobody's going to get that on their first try because nobody's going to listen to the narrator for every single choice on their first try. But if you do, you get the freedom ending, where you go free from the facility and into the open sunlight. And you find out that you were being controlled by a mind control facility and that something had turned it off, and all your coworkers had disappeared. And when you get to leave, but you still don't know why your coworkers disappeared, why the machine got shut off. But the narrator talks about how you don't need to know because it was not knowledge or power you had been seeking, but happiness, and to let go. And once you step outside, you lose control of Stanley, and Stanley it's like a cutscene. He starts looking around and then looking up at the sky, and it says, and Stanley was happy. And then the game fades to black, fades to white, fades to black, and fades right back into the beginning of the game again, with the loading screen saying the end is never the end. And no matter what ending you get, it always loops back to the beginning, and it says the end is never the end. Now, an aspect of the Stanley Parable that nobody takes seriously, that I wish they did, that nobody talks about, because I don't think people consciously realize it, is, and this is something that I was really hoping to save as an epic reveal in my Beginner's Guide video, but I'll just have to say it now. One of the reasons I think the game is called the Beginner's Guide is because So the trailers for the game especially really focus on this theme of endings and beginnings. And the narrator says, let's begin again. And then the text says, let's begin again, and goes between all the endings. And it says, let's begin again. And whenever you play the game, on the main menu, it says begin the game. And when you pause the game, it says resume the game, begin the game again, or quit. And I think it's interesting that a restart is called begin the game again instead of restart. And begin, and then in the demo, in the Stanley Parable demo, he talks about, I don't want a game of endings, I want a game of beginnings. How can one game end so many times? It doesn't make sense. I want a game of beginnings. And that's supposed to hint at, like, the kind of underlying message that, like, Buddhism is there's a lot of themes of Buddhism in Davey Wreen's work. It's a very important part of his life, and he feels very strongly about Buddhism. And one of the ideas is to understand that everything in life is perpetual and continuous. There is no such thing as an ending. Even when you die, that's just a new beginning. So the idea of the Stanley Parable, and the only way to win the Stanley Parable is to quit the game. But then you're actively not playing the game anymore. But that's kind of the point. And it's supposed to be a metaphor for a lot of shit. So my point is, Stanley Parable has a lot of endings. I genuinely believe that the Amazing Digital Circus is going to have a time loop involved. Now, I do also think this is important. At one point in the Stanley Parable, if you disobey the narrator for every choice, then the final choice you get is a red button and a blue... a red door and a blue door. And they get you two different endings. The blue door takes you to Shrimp Town. The blue door takes you to the game's ending, which is where you disobey the narrator at every single opportunity. And the blue door takes you basically to a room that isn't developed yet, and then you just start playing other video games. The narrator's like, if you hate my game so much, just play someone else's game. And then you end up playing Minecraft and Portal. Or in the newer version, you play Firewatch and Rocket League. And it's just funny. It's haha funny. And basically, the situation is that they didn't want the Stanley Parable to be what am I trying to say? The very ending of the game's ending, you escape the games, and then you find yourself in the office again, but it's old, and it's a callback to the original 2011 Stanley Parable mod. This ending makes a lot more sense in the original mod. What happens is that it just loops you back to the beginning of the game, but this time there's no narrator, and all the doors are open, and you can go wherever you want, but you also can't interact with anything. And then at some point it cuts to black, and the narrator says, I wonder what he found, if he's satisfied being the leading man in his own story. He needs me to set boundaries for him and be the source of consistency and structure in his life. And it's a lot more like subtle in the original game. It's a lot less subtle in the Ultra Deluxe version, the message they're going for. But basically, if you disobey the narrator, he just kind of goes like, oh, eventually he'll start listening to me again. If you take the red door instead of the blue door, then he says, oh, thank God you're willing to listen to me. And he says a bunch of stuff that's really important. He says, can't you see that I've wanted us to be happy all this time? The problem is all these choices. You running around, running and running, just the way you're doing right now. We would both be so much happier if you would just stop moving. So let's go into this room where we can both be happy. And then he takes you to this beautiful planetarium, and he says, here, if we stay here in this beautiful place, Stanley, I think I'm happy. I think I'll finally actually be happy. And then you stay in there for however long you want to, and then you leave because you can't just stay in there forever. And once you leave, he starts freaking out, and he's like, wait, no, don't do that. Go back to the other room. We want to stay there. Don't take this away from me. And the other room is a giant staircase that you can commit suicide off of. And the ending is you trying to kill yourself while the narrator is desperately trying to convince you to go back to the other room and just enjoy the planetarium. And you can do it quickly, or you can drag this ending out and bring out a lot of dialogue. This ending is called in the game's files the Zending, which involves the word Zen, which feels very much like a commentary on probably some kind of experience Davey had in his own life that he feels very strongly about, that he relates to the concept of Zen, that he relates to Buddhism somehow. But I say that, but the original Zending was different than this one. The original it actually got changed midway through development. The original Zending just had the narrator giving you a bunch of instructions in an open world type environment, and you being able to choose whether to listen to him or not, and then something would happen, and we don't know all the details of the original Zending. But basically, this version deals very much with the idea of an abusive relationship where someone is like, I need you to be happy. I can't just be happy on my own. I need you to be happy, and you just want to get the fuck away from them. At least that's what it feels like to me. It's a very open-ended interpretation, how you could interpret it, but it can be interpreted in a much more spiritually significant way. But the point I'm making, and I say spiritually, I'm not a religious person, I'm not Christian or anything, but I say spiritually meaning it. The point of what I'm saying is that, in my opinion, it's one of the most important endings in the game. Because it's what happens when you disobey the narrator and then finally listen to him for the final choice. Or you can obey the narrator for the entire game and then disobey on the final choice by turning the mind control machine on to use for yourself instead of turning it off. And when you do that, the narrator goes like, oh, Stanley, you weren't supposed to do that, and I'm not going to give you any control. In fact, I'm just going to blow up the whole facility, and it starts playing music, like you can you can press the right button combination to turn off the bomb, and then he reveals like halfway through, like, by the way, you can't turn the bomb off, it's inevitable. Like, you think that just because there's all these buttons that you have some choice in the matter, but there really is no choice. You're just going to die. This is a tragedy. And you actually can't do anything. You actually can't do anything. It really is expertly crafted to make you think you can do something, but you can't do anything. No matter what you do, the bomb will go off at the end of that timer. And the narrator, and if you revisit, the narrator will talk about, will comment on it. He'll be like, how many times will you come back here trying to do something different? There's no way to win. And Stanley died again. And Stanley died again. And yeah, both of the endings end with Stanley dying. The Control ending ends with the narrator killing you against your wishes, and the Zending ends with you killing yourself against the narrator's wishes. And here's the funny thing, right? The Control ending has a timer counting down. The Zending has no time pressure. You can stay there forever. So The Beginner's Guide is a sequel. And in the sequel, The Beginner's Guide, it's about... I'm skipping over a lot of the Stanley Parable, like a lot of it, and then I have a lot more to say. But this is just one detail that I think was really relevant to the Amazing Digital Circus. The Beginner's Guide is a game where it's being narrated by the real world flesh and blood Davey Wreden, and he says, like, you can email me this email address. We're going to be looking at the video games made by a friend of mine who stopped making games, and I want to compile them here and try to convince him to start creating again. And as the game goes on, it becomes increasingly obvious that, and his name is Coda, it becomes increasingly obvious that not only is Coda not a real person in real life, and that the game is a fiction that made you believe it was nonfiction, but Coda might not even be a boy. Coda might also not even fucking exist within the fiction. Coda might actually just be an alter in Davey's mind. So it could be a metaphor for both Davey and Coda are Davey in real life, different parts of Davey. And that's like how it works. And basically the games are made a certain way. They relate back to the Stanley Parable. They're thematically important to both the content of the Stanley Parable and what happened in Davey Wreden's real life surrounding the release of the Stanley Parable, both before and after. And you'd only know this information if you either were massively parasocial or you listened to a very specific interview he did where he basically spilled all the beans and all the details and told all. And he did a speech at a university where he talked very in depth about his life and how it related to the Beginner's Guide for people who were interested. And also, but that wasn't even the purpose of his speech. He was there to talk about the Stanley Parable. It was ironic. And there's also an interview he did, just like on a podcast, called the Tone Control Podcast, episode 20, where he interviews and he confirms Coda isn't real. He confirms the game is fiction, and he talks a lot about it. And he doesn't go too in-depth, but he gives some details. And from what we can gather, it relates to his real life, and it actually used to be even more related to his real life, and he decided not to make it that way and rewrote it at the last second because he felt weird including that in the video game. So, all of that being said, David Wreden as he is lovely colloquially known, made this game. And it's very much, there's a lot of themes going on. The point of the game is that Coda made these video games, and Davey is showing them to you and telling you what he thinks they mean. And every single time he skips over important details and pretends like you're still getting the full experience, and that he's just making it more convenient for you. He's making it easier for you to see all the art. And sometimes it's reasonable, like there's one part where you'd have to sit inside of a prison cell for an hour, and he just skips it. And there's one part where that's like slightly more reasonable, but it's still like you're taking creative liberties. But there's other ones where it's like you like have to go through a maze, and he's like, the maze is pointless, so I'm just gonna skip you past the maze. And there's one part where it's like, this room is pointless, I don't really understand the point of this room, so we're just gonna move on. This, you have to like walk really slowly up these stairs, but if you press enter, I'll just let you walk at full speed and you can just go right up. And it's like, that's not you're taking the art out of the art to talk about what you think it means. And it's always about him. His interpretation of the art is always about him. He always thinks the games are about him. And he doesn't realize that there are other people in the world other than he's like the densest ego in the universe. And Coda is like the exact opposite. Coda makes these games with zero intention of ever showing them to another living soul. And only got seen by Davey because Davey went snooping around on his computer, or her computer, when they didn't want him to. And Davey, in the game, the character Davey, is very, very egotistical. He's like the part of real life Davey's brain that wants validation and to be told he's good, and then Coda's the part of him that just does art for the sake of doing the art, and is like in tune with the universe, and has no sense of self. And at the end of the game, Coda leaves a message for Davey, basically saying like, hey, I'm not going to make video games anymore, and I'm going to have to ask you not to talk to me anymore. And Davey cannot accept this. So he makes this game, he makes the beginner's guide and says, that's why I'm releasing your collection, because I need to talk to you again. And by that point, you're like disgusted and you're like, I shouldn't be playing this. And there's just this general uncomfortable feeling. But it's also very clear that the game is fiction by the end. There's a lot of, it wasn't for me, because I had no media literacy when I first saw this in 2019, and in fact, analyzing this game is what gave me media literacy in the first place, because I went down a fucking rabbit hole, man. This game is deep. And I cannot talk about it all in this video. But what I can tell you is that one of the main recurring themes of Coda's games is that there's a door that you open, and on the other side of the door is a black space, and then another door on the other side of the black space with fog in the black space. And there's a lever to open the first door on the outside. And what you have to do is, and if you pull the lever again, it closes the door. You have to pull the lever down to open the door, then pull it up to close the door, but walk in to trap yourself in the black space, and then it reveals a new lever inside the black space that you pull to open the second door. And this shows up in several of Coda's games. And also, there's this lamppost. In the lamppost, Davey says that the lamppost is a destination, is an ending. Because Coda was tired of his games going on forever and having no real point, so he started giving them an ending, and that's how he interprets the lamppost. And the narrator talks in the Stanley Parable during the confusion ending about a lot about the journey and the destination. He says, do you think that life is about the journey or the destination? Do you think that a story is still a story if there's no destination? Because the act of moving forward is creating a destination. And he goes on that train of thought. And that's like the main thesis of the Stanley Parable, is that like there is no ending. And the only way to make your life yours is to just quit the game and take control of your life, because whenever you go through these endings, you're just killing yourself for the sake of the office work, for the sake of society, for the sake of your boss, for the sake of whoever abusive figure is in your life. And that's what the Stanley Parable is about, to me at least. That's one of the many things the Stanley Parable is about, but the beginner's guide leans into this theme too, and there's this back and forth. Basically, at the end of the game, the plot twist is revealed that the lampposts that were at the end of all of his games were actually not. Apparently, one of the things that Coda says is, would you stop adding lampposts to my games? Which implies very heavily that the lampposts aren't even naturally there, that he's adding them. So Davey changes Coda's games and then says, I think that this change that I made to the story tells us what the story actually means. Which makes no sense. Like, obviously you changed it, so why would that be the author's intent? But it's almost like he thinks he knows the games better than the author knows them. And because he desperately wants to make the work his own and to feel good about it and to feel like he made it and to feel like he's contributed something positive to the world. And so he takes something that isn't his and isn't his to take, and he shows it to the world, and he gives his own interpretation. He puts his own spin on it. And it's a really deep game. There's a lot going on. There's several layers through which to read it. But the most basic layer and how it's related to the Stanley Parable and how it's related to the Amazing Digital Circus is that this lamppost represents an ending, but it also represents a beginning, which is why the game is called The Beginner's Guide. And that's the big aha moment that you're supposed to have when you're researching the game, that I've not seen a single goddamn person on YouTube come to that conclusion. Not a single video essay about The Beginner's Guide has figured out, oh, the Stanley Parable says that endings and beginnings are the same thing, and the narrator says he wants a game of beginnings, and the next game he makes is called The Beginner's Guide, and it's about a bunch of endings that the soul of the artist gets sick of and says, I just want it to go on forever. One of the games is a house. And the house, you walk into the house, you start the game inside of a room. There's a door closed behind you, and there's a door at the end. And this can be interpreted as the black space, but artistically realized. And instead of pulling some lever, you go inside the house, and there's a person in there. And the person tells you to clean the house for them. And they stand there ordering you around and tell you to clean the house up. And the house keeps uncleaning itself. And you never, ever get to clean the house. Davy puts a stop to the cleaning game and says that that's where it ends. But then he admits later that the original game went on forever, and he only put an end to it because he wanted to put an end so that you could see the rest of Coda's games. But Coda was apparently artistically okay with you just being inside a room forever. Now, this is obviously a misunderstanding if you actually pay attention. I say obviously, it's not obvious. It took me a long time to figure this out, but I think that the actual game is meant to show Davy. And he said this was the first game that Coda made that he physically showed Davy and was proud of. He thinks I think the point of the game is that Coda is trying to move on with his life by shutting the door on a past and moving forward. But with Davy, he can't shut the door on Davy because Davy is always ruining his own house again. He's always ruining his own space, and he just wants Coda to stay in that space with him forever. And Coda sees this as abusive and just wants out. And Coda wanted Davy to see that. But Davy is so self-absorbed that he thought he was the one cleaning the house. And he thought that Coda was trying to tell him that cleaning a house is peaceful and lovely and that doing it forever is actually great. And that's because that is what Davy would want and would want to do for someone else. Davy wants to spend forever cleaning someone else's house. He wants someone else to do that for him. Coda wants to move on, never stay in one space for too long. But that's ironic because in the games, Davy wants to move on and Coda wants to sit in the black space. And he wants you to sit in the black space and understand it. And there's characters talking about it. There's characters talking about the black space. There's a lot of importance placed on this black space between the doors, but Davy never really addresses it. The only time in the whole game Davy addresses what you're looking at is to say, I think the puzzle doors mean that Coda's trying to move on from something in his life, and to say, I think that this area with the house is meant to represent the area between the two doors. Everywhere else in the game, he never mentions the puzzle or talks about what he thinks it means within the context of the game. You go through the puzzle doors. The first game that the lamppost is in, you go through the puzzle doors, and then you go through a bunch of stuff, and then you eventually end up at a lamppost. And you end up locked in rooms with a bunch of people, talking to them. And then you move on, and then you end up in a room with a lamppost. And the room is actually a courtyard in an apartment building where it's positioned like where the lamppost is positioned like a, oh my gosh, what's it called? The thing at the center of a big prison that's like a lighthouse. You know what I'm talking about, right? Panopticon, that's the one. A panopticon. And that's a big theory I have, is that it's meant to represent a panopticon in that game. That's how Coda meant it to be taken, but that Davey totally misunderstood it. And because he misunderstands fucking everything. But the point is that I believe, my headcanon is that the original game actually had the lamppost in it, but that Davey inserted the lamppost into all of Coda's future games to mean something different. And when Davey uses the lamppost, he uses it to mean an ending. But it's also a beginning. And when you beat the game, it displays the main menu again, which has always shown a lamppost, but now it shows a lamppost with the words, the beginner's guide, like it always has. And the point is, it's a beginning. Every ending is a beginning. It loops. It loops in on itself. When you beat the Stanley Parable, at the end of the intro of the Stanley Parable is, Stanley pushed buttons forever and Stanley was happy. But one day something peculiar happened. And then the ending of the Stanley Parable is, Stanley knew this was the way things were meant to happen, being free, and Stanley was happy. And both ends with, and Stanley was happy, and then they loop back to the beginning and you're in your office again like nothing had happened. It explicitly doesn't boot you back out to the main menu and make you restart. It explicitly just goes right back to the start again. So I think that the Amazing Digital Circus is going to have a time loop of some sort for at least one of the characters. Probably Jax, maybe Pomni. One of the characters is going to have to get amnesia and relive the events of the entire series over and over again in order to allow everyone else to leave. It's going to be like or maybe for some reason, that's just my guess. So that's one thing. So that's what I think the Stanley Parable. Now, the lamppost, what does it mean? Danny North has a video about object theory, which is unironically a theory that the objects laying around the circus are humans who have been abstracted in the future, sent back to the past. Now you might say, how does that work in code? Is there time travel? No, it's not time travel. It's some weird code bullshit. Or maybe it is magical time travel. Who fucking knows? The point is, the theory is that the objects are actually the humans. And maybe it's not even time travel. Maybe it's just that the humans are, their minds are split into the bodies of the human and this. Or maybe they're made of abstract. There's all sorts of theories that like the humans are actually just made from abstractions of previous humans, that the only real humans were the original like 5 or 6, and that all of the subsequent ones were remade using these templates. There's a lot of evidence for that. There's a lot of evidence that they're original people, because if they were created then why would Cain know about YouTube? It only makes sense if they're real people that actually have some form of consciousness, because Cain's cut off from the outside world, but he doesn't know what fucking YouTube is, but Pomni and Jax do, and Zubul knows what Breaking Bad is, but Ragatha doesn't, which very heavily implies that they're real humans with real-world memories. So, I don't know exactly what will happen, but here's what I know. The beginner's guide, the lamppost is important. It represents an ending and a beginning. And Coda thinks of the lamppost as a panopticon, a watching eye. Davey thinks of the lamppost as a symbol of the ending, and actually it's a symbol of the beginning. And for Coda, it's a beginning of a new dark era because there's a panopticon now. But for Davey, it's the end of a long and painful era. And these things happen in sync with each other. And the point is, god damn it, that Jax is, if object theory is real, then the plants are ribbit. I know how fucking stupid this sounds, but please bear with me. There's actually a lot of evidence for this. The plants are ribbit, the paintings are Kathmo, and the lamp post is Jax. The lamppost itself is Jax. And if this is true, that has a lot of implications, because one of the other theories is that Jax, on some level, is or has the consciousness of, or is somehow very closely and importantly connected to, Scratch. Scratch is another name for the devil. It's a complicated story, but basically, Old Scratch is another name for the devil. And Scratch making Cain is like a perversion and inversion of the Bible story, where God makes Cain, but Satan tips him. although I suppose in the Bible, right, God and Satan both kind of, God made the world, but Satan also kind of ruled over it in the same way that Kinger made the world. But that would imply that God made the world with pointers from Satan, which is a very Gnostic way of looking at it. But the point I'm getting at is that religion aside, if Scratch is the devil, then that very heavily implies that there's something iffy going on with Jax and with Cain. And there's this theory that Jax is named backwards as Scratch, and there's a lot of backwards stuff going on. So here's why this is important. I think that an important theme of the Zinding from the Stanley Parable is that the narrator wants you to stay in that black space, and you, Stanley, want to leave. And in the beginner's guide, Coda wants you to stay in the house doing the chores, and Davy wants to leave. But in reality, that it was the opposite before. Davy wants Coda to stay with him forever, and Coda wants to leave. So there's this theme of this tension between wanting to stay still and wanting to move. And there's lots of lines in both games. Like there's one part where the narrator says, you can be peaceful if you just stop moving. You just have to stop moving. And there's this part where Davy, the narrator in the beginner's guide, says, you can't sit still in the dark space for too long. You have to keep moving. It's how you stay alive. And that's the point I'm making, is that this theme is very important to the Stanley Parable in the beginner's guide. And I think this theme is going to be explored in TADC's finale. There's going to be something important with time loops and with coming to peace with eternity and death. But that's not all. There's more to it than that. Davy and Coda, Davy didn't make the games. Davy just claimed ownership of the games. Coda's the one who actually made the games. Right? Maybe Scratch, in a way, made the circus, but Cain takes credit for making the circus. Because Cain's the one who actually physically created it, but he got all of his skills to do so from Scratch. And from Kinger. Now, here's what I'm thinking. Who is Davy and who is Scratch? Davy could be, or who is Coda? Davy could be seen as Scratch, and Coda could be seen as Kinger, which would explain a lot. Coda, but it could also be the other way around. It could also be that Jax and Scratch are Davy and Coda, that Scratch is Coda, and that Jax is Davy. And if Jax is Coda and Scratch is Davy, one way that could be interpreted is that Scratch wants them to stay in the circus. Or no, wait. Or well, yeah, Scratch wants them to leave the circus and Jax wants them to stay forever. Or maybe Kinger. Maybe it'll be Kinger, or maybe it'll just be Pomni and Jax. There's this weird thing going on with the merch videos where they keep making jokes about Pomni and Jax being the same person. And if Pomni, like it shows a bunch of Pomnis and then Jax is also there. What's that all about? It shows Pomni wearing Jax's skin as a plush. What the fuck does that mean? What is the implication of that? How do you even interpret something like that? And the thing about it is that I think that Pomni and Jax, or Kinger and Jax, or Scratch and Jax, some pair involving Jax is going to be parallel to Coda and Davy in some important, meaningful way in the story, or maybe involving Cain somehow. And the circus itself will be symbolically important in the same way that the games themselves are symbolically important in the beginner's guide in the Stanley Parable, which is to say that the games in the beginner's guide take on the form of what the people think about it, in a similar way to how the humans have the ability to conjure. Because Davy thinks the game means a certain thing, so it physically adds a lamppost to the game. If you think there's an exit door, it will create an exit door, that kind of thing. And there's a lot of parallels. I don't know exactly what this means. I don't know exactly what my theory is, but there's something there. If I had to put a handle on it, I would say I think there's going to be a time loop. I think someone is going to want to stay, someone's going to want to leave, And that choice is going to actually come up. Not the fake red and blue button choice, but the real red and blue button choice. Maybe it will even happen in the form of a red door and a blue door. I think it's interesting that the exit door is a big red door, when a big red door in the Stanley Parable is what leads you to the Zinding. And the Zinding is what's most thematically immediately comparable to the Beginner's Guide. So, I want to be so very goddamn clear about this. Sorry, I've worked goddamn into my vocabulary, into my vernacular. Sorry about that. But I really believe that there's going to be a time loop, and I really, really believe that there's going to be something important with the lamppost, because Gooseworks made... Oh yeah, if you have no idea what I'm fucking talking about, Gooseworks made a weird, ominous tweet about the lamppost in the movie poster, that it'll be important somehow. And it's also in episode 1 of the show. Now, there's one more detail from this that's honestly more of a piece of evidence than anything. But this is, in my opinion, the nail in the coffin, that the Beginner's Guide will have something to do with the narrative of the game. And that's this. So, in my opinion, the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe, which was made after the Beginner's Guide, contains a lot of hints in it for how to interpret the Beginner's Guide. That's a video for another day. But one of the big hints, is when you do the freedom ending, which is like obey the narrator ending, in Ultra Deluxe with the bucket. It's a long story. Long story short, the game gives you a bucket, and whenever you take the bucket with you, it gives you a different ending for every ending, and different dialogue and stuff to basically double the amount of content in the game. And that's kind of the joke. Well, if you take the bucket with you on the like obey the narrator for every choice ending, then everything is the same right up until the end, and when it closes and doesn't let you leave with the bucket. Because the building doesn't want the bucket to leave, because the joke is that the bucket is comforting, and the building is so comforted by the bucket that it doesn't want you to leave as long as you have the bucket with you. And then he says, being trapped eternally in darkness isn't so bad as long as I have the bucket, right? Now, that same ending, as the door is opening to let you out, to let you in the bucket out before it finishes opening, it never finishes and then it closes again. There's this monologue where the narrator says Stanley and the bucket started talking together about the life that they wanted to lead once they got out this side of this building. The bucket wanted to learn to roller skate. Stanley wanted to sneeze in every country on Earth. Both of them, and this is so unbelievably important, what I'm about to say here, this is I think the key to unraveling everything in all of these pieces of media and in the Beginner's Guide and in the Amazing Digital Circus. He says both of them wanted to watch a movie, any movie, and then pause it halfway and watch it in reverse from the end. That's his exact line of dialogue. You can look it up. I just spit. I'm sorry, that was gross. So you can see it on camera. But that's his exact line of dialogue. You can look it up. He says both of them wanted to watch a movie, any movie, watch it halfway, pause it halfway, and then watch it in reverse from the end. And then he says, it was a simple life they envisioned, both of them, blah, 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 and then the rest of the ending goes on. But that, I think, is a clue. Now, I had a similar theory about the Beginner's Guide, that the whole game converges on the house, where you either clean it forever or you leave, and it's in the black space between the doors, and the whole game converges on that one point. And the game reads narratively from the start to middle the same as from the end to the middle. And that's how the Beginner's Guide is supposed to be interpreted. And that this line of dialogue in Ultra Deluxe is a hint about how to interpret the Beginner's Guide. Now, that's why I kept this to myself, because I was like, this is world-changing information. When Danny North first told me about the convergence theory, I knew that he was a genius. And I was like, yes, because Beginner's Guide has convergence theory. And that was made by Davey Wreden. The Stanley Parable was made by Davey Wreden. Gooseworks said they were inspired by Stanley Parable. I bet it has convergence theory. I bet Gooseworks figured this shit out before anyone made a video essay about it and decided to just make their own show about it. So, convergence theory, if you don't know, is that episode 1 of the Amazing Digital Circus corresponds to 9, 2 to 8, 3 to 7, 4 to 6, and 5 to itself, to the other half of itself. And that the story mirrors on intermission time. Intermission time is the convergence point. and that if you watch the show from episode 1 to episode 5, and then from the end backwards to episode 5 in intermission time, the story plays out the same. That the episodes' plots mirror each other. And with this, we can guess what will happen in episode 9 based on what happens in the pilot. Now, there's some shit going on with that. You can think about that yourself, but to kind of put you on the path, the Gloink Queen is there and is down below the circus. And the Gloinks seem to represent the people of the circus, and also the shapes being made by Kane. It's a long story. The point is, I believe in convergence theory, and Beginner's Guide has convergence theory, which I think really points to Beginner's Guide is a source of inspiration for Gooseworks. And because we already know Stanley Parable is a source of inspiration for Gooseworks, so this, in my opinion, I think it proves that there's also inspiration coming from the Beginner's Guide, because going to halfway point and then reversing from the end to the middle is so specific. It's so oddly specific that, like, how would you think to do that? Now, there's one more thing. Beginner's Guide has a chapter called Backwards, where you can only walk backwards, and that's one of the levels that Coda makes. I'm not going to get it that deep into the Beginner's Guide right now because that's a whole nother video. I can go deeper into this if I want, but I want to go right now. I don't want this video to be an hour long. It's already almost an hour long. So there's already a level talking about going in reverse, like planting that seed. And there's already a trailer. The trailer for episode 9 has reverse sound effects in it. I really do believe that the show is going to mean something played backwards, which is an insane thing to say. And I think that's why the show has to be animated and made so obsessively. And if this succeeds, I don't even know where this is going to go. Now, when I say reverse, I don't even mean necessarily literally in reverse as much as I mean the plot points in reverse. But maybe I do mean reverse. Maybe it'll make sense after episode 9 comes out. So, convergence theory is in Beginner's Guide. Lamppost is a major symbol of the Beginner's Guide. A major symbol of the Stanley Parable is a red and blue door, where the red one leads to you to a room made by Kane, by the narrator, that he wants you to leave. He doesn't want you to leave, and you want to leave. Or the blue door, which takes you to a place where you can't leave, and where you can't come back, but ultimately you end up coming back anyway. And the Beginner's Guide has themes of beginning and ending in the same place, and the lamppost is a symbol of both the end and the beginning of the entire game. And the Beginner's Guide ends with you ascending out of the game and seeing a maze from the outside, which is a callback to the beginning, which is another reason why inversion theory makes sense, why convergence theory makes sense for Beginner's Guide. And I think that means that the show is going to end with them escaping the circus, even if it doesn't make sense somehow. It's not going to be all it's chalked up to be. There's going to be a catch, but they are going to get to leave, but it's going to be a catch. It's going to take them to Shrimp Town. That's all I got for now. Mull over that, theorize about that, figure something out. I'll talk to you later. Bye.